There are people who walk through life with a shattered inner world, nothing visible on the outside, yet inside, they live among the ruins of past failures, abandoned dreams, and silent emotional wounds. They are not weak, they are survivors of battles no one ever saw. The broken self is not born, it is shaped. It emerges when someone carries pain without guidance, responsibility without support, and expectations without understanding. It happens when love arrives wearing the mask of manipulation, when trust collapses under betrayal, and when hope is crushed by the weight of reality. These individuals often become masters of emotional camouflage. They smile, they nod, they function, but they do not feel whole. Their heart beats, yet something inside feels permanently cracked. They don't ask for help, not because they don't need it, but because at some point in life, they learned that reaching out leads to disappointment. They built walls not to keep love away, but to protect what little strength remains. But here is the truth: a broken self is not a final identity. It is a phase, a silent moment in a long story, not the ending. Just like shattered glass can be reshaped by fire, the soul can be rebuilt through discomfort, self-honesty, and patience. Healing is not loud. It is quiet rebellion against the past, choosing to believe again, choosing to trust again, choosing to stand even when every scar whispers stay down. The broken self finds power in rebuilding, not by rushing recovery, not by pretending to be healed, but by slowly reclaiming lost parts of the soul. Through self-reflection, emotional courage, new experiences, and meaningful connections, healing becomes possible, not overnight, but step by step. What feels like destruction becomes rebirth. What feels like weakness becomes inner strength. And what once felt like emptiness becomes a deeper understanding of life and purpose. Remember, being broken doesn't mean being defeated. It means you have survived something powerful, and survival is not shame. It is proof that you are capable of extraordinary strength. Stand with your cracks, honor your scars. For those who have been broken, when they rise wiser, stronger, and with a heart that understands more than most will ever know. A broken self often begins with emotional wounds that were never acknowledged, processed, or healed. These wounds may come from childhood neglect, harsh criticism, emotional abandonment, toxic relationships, failure, or humiliation. When pain is never understood or supported, it does not disappear, it transforms into a silent force that shapes how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People who carry deep emotional wounds tend to see the world through a filter of fear or caution, expecting hurt before it even arrives. They struggle to trust compliments, love, or kindness because part of them believes they don't deserve it, or that it will eventually turn into disappointment. Their internal world becomes a battlefield where their desire for connection constantly collides with their fear of vulnerability. Their decisions are influenced by avoidance rather than intention. They may avoid opportunities not because they lack potential, but because past experiences taught them that trying leads to pain. They may isolate themselves not out of preference, but as self-protection. The emotional wounds act like an internal echo repeating, "Don't risk it again." And in trying to avoid hurt, they unknowingly limit their growth and happiness. These individuals often appear strong on the outside because they've practiced holding themselves together when no one else did. But strength built from pain can turn into emotional rigidity, where walls feel safer than bridges, where silence feels safer than expression, and where loneliness feels safer than being misunderstood. The psychology behind this is simple yet profound. The brain remembers pain more intensely than joy, and it shapes future behavior to avoid repeated suffering. A person with buried emotional wounds doesn't simply move on. They carry scars that influence everything: self-esteem, relationships, ambition, trust, and inner peace. True healing begins only when those hidden emotions are recognized instead of suppressed, when the pain is allowed to speak rather than being pushed into silence. Only then can the broken self evolve from surviving to living, from protecting to growing, and from enduring to rising. When someone's sense of self breaks, distorted beliefs often take root. Deep, powerful narratives that feel like truth, but are actually emotional scars disguised as identity. These beliefs sound like, "I'm not enough," "everyone leaves," "I can't trust anyone," "I always fail," or "I don't deserve good things." Over time, these internal sentences become automatic, shaping perceptions without conscious awareness. The mind begins to interpret every situation as proof of inadequacy or danger. A compliment becomes suspicious, a positive opportunity feels threatening, and emotional closeness triggers fear instead of comfort. This is the silent power of distorted self-beliefs. They don't just affect how a person feels, they rewrite how they see reality. These beliefs often come from environments where love was conditional, support was inconsistent, or criticism outweighed encouragement. A child who grows up constantly questioned, ignored, or compared eventually internalizes the belief that something is inherently wrong with them. A person who experiences repeated rejection or betrayal learns to expect abandonment. Over years, these beliefs crystallize into identity, not because they are true, but because they were repeated by experience and reinforced by fear. The brain, trying to protect, begins filtering life through these emotional conclusions, reinforcing them again and again like an echo chamber of self-doubt. In adulthood, these distorted beliefs can manifest in perfectionism, chronic self-criticism, emotional numbness, over-apologizing, defensiveness, or a constant need for validation. They may sabotage relationships because they fear losing them, or they may avoid intimacy because vulnerability feels dangerous. Success can feel undeserved, and mistakes feel catastrophic. Inside, there is a quiet conflict, longing for connection and confidence battling against the inner voice that insists failure or rejection is inevitable. Healing these beliefs requires patience, compassion, and the courage to question long-held emotional truths. It begins when a person realizes, this belief is not who I am. It is who I became in response to pain. With therapy, self-reflection, supportive relationships, or emotional awareness practices, the mind can slowly learn new narratives. I am evolving. I am worthy of respect and love. I can trust carefully. I am allowed to start again. Rewriting the mind is not about pretending pain never existed. It's about refusing to let it define the future. When distorted beliefs are challenged and replaced with healthier ones, the broken self begins to rebuild not from fear, but from truth. Many people with a broken self struggle deeply with connection, not because they don't crave love or belonging, but because connection feels dangerous. When someone has been hurt, neglected, betrayed, or shamed repeatedly, their nervous system learns to associate closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with pain. So instead of leaning toward relationships, they pull away. They may appear distant, guarded, or uninterested, but inside there is often a quiet yearning for someone to truly understand them without judgment or expectation. This paradox, wanting closeness yet fearing it, is one of the most painful psychological patterns of a wounded identity. These individuals often build emotional walls not because they are cold, but because somewhere in their past, trusting the wrong person had consequences so severe that self-protection became instinct. They learn that feelings can be used against them, that opening up can lead to abandonment, and that letting someone into their inner world can expose wounds they would rather keep hidden. As a result, they become experts in self-containment. They might avoid deep conversations, keep friendships superficial, or sabotage promising connections before they can grow. They convince themselves they are safer alone, even if loneliness quietly aches beneath the surface. Over time, emotional isolation can morph into a belief that others cannot be trusted, or that they themselves are unworthy of love. And once such beliefs take hold, the mind starts filtering life accordingly. Someone not texting back feels like rejection. A small misunderstanding feels like betrayal. Compliments feel insincere. Acts of kindness feel suspicious. The broken self interprets even neutral situations through a lens of caution and doubt. But beneath this defensive armor lies a simple truth. They are not avoiding people. They are avoiding pain. Healing this pattern is not about suddenly becoming outgoing or forcing vulnerability. It begins with learning emotional safety again, slowly, gently, one small step at a time. It means recognizing that not everyone is the same, that not every relationship ends in hurt, and that trusting selectively is wiser than never trusting at all. It requires permissions. Permission to be cautious, but also permission to try. Permission to open the door just a little. Permission to let others show who they are before assuming the worst. For many, the journey begins internally before it ever involves another person. They learn to trust themselves first. Trust their intuition, their boundaries, their ability to walk away if needed. When they rebuild inner trust, external trust becomes less frightening. Eventually, they discover that connection does not weaken them, it nourishes them. That love does not trap them, it frees them, and that the right people do not force entry. They knock gently, wait patiently, and stay consistent. The broken self slowly learns that letting someone in is not surrender. It is choosing to believe that healing is possible through connection, not despite it. When someone carries a broken self, they often develop an inner critic so loud and punishing that it becomes its own prison. Instead of offering encouragement, their inner voice reminds them of every mistake, every flaw, every moment of perceived failure. This critic was not born, it was shaped through years of judgment, comparisons, emotional invalidation, or environments where nothing they did was ever enough. So they internalize the belief that they are fundamentally flawed. They obsess over imperfections, replay awkward moments, and harshly scrutinize themselves in ways they would never do to another human being. To the outside world, they may seem quiet, withdrawn, overly humble, or too hard on themselves. But internally, they are fighting a silent war between who they are and who they believe they should be. This internal harshness drives them toward perfectionism, not the healthy desire to grow, but the desperate need to avoid criticism, rejection, or shame. They try to earn their worth instead of knowing they already have it. They chase validation but never feel deserving of it when it arrives. They apologize for existing, downplay achievements, and assume others secretly see them the way they see themselves. Broken, inadequate, replaceable. Over time, this self-judgment becomes exhausting. It kills momentum, destroys confidence, and traps them in cycles of self-doubt and procrastination. They hesitate to start new things, fearing failure. They refuse opportunities, fearing exposure. They stay small, not because they lack potential, but because they believe they are undeserving of stepping forward. And yet, beneath that heavy voice of judgment exists a quiet truth. People with a broken self are often deeply sensitive, thoughtful, and capable. They notice details others miss. They reflect deeply. They hold empathy born from struggle, but because they constantly criticize themselves, they fail to recognize their own depth. What they interpret as weakness is often simply sensitivity that was never nurtured. If life had taught them to embrace who they are instead of punishing themselves for it, many would grow into extraordinary individuals, creators, thinkers, healers, leaders who understand human struggle from the inside out. Healing begins not with silencing the inner critic entirely, but with questioning it. Is every harsh belief a fact or a memory? Whose voice does it really echo? A parent, a teacher, society, or their own fear? Slowly, they learn that self-compassion is not ego, it is medicine. That speaking to themselves gently is not delusion, it is recovery. That they are allowed to make mistakes, to learn, to rest, to be imperfect, and still be worthy. Healing means replacing "I am broken" with "I am healing," and eventually "I am growing," With time, the critic becomes quieter, replaced by a voice that encourages instead of condemns. And when that shift happens, something miraculous unfolds. The broken self does not disappear. It transforms into a wiser self, a self that understands pain but no longer bows to it, a self that does not seek perfection but self-acceptance, a self that finally learns to breathe again. When a person carries a broken self, they often develop a silent fear of emotional closeness. To the world, they may appear distant or independent, but internally, they feel a quiet terror that if someone truly sees them, they will be rejected, judged, or abandoned. This fear is not born overnight. It's the result of past wounds, disappointments, betrayals, or experiences where trust was met not with safety, but with hurt. Over time, vulnerability becomes dangerous in their mind. So they build walls, strong, invisible, and convincing. They avoid deep conversations, hesitate to express needs, and struggle to reveal emotions, believing that silence protects them. But what they don't realize is that this protective armor becomes a cage that keeps love and connection out just as effectively as it keeps pain away. They often appear self-sufficient and emotionally controlled, as though they don't need anyone. But this self-sufficiency is not pride, it is survival. They have learned not to rely because reliance once led to disappointment. They keep relationships at a safe distance, never too close, never too vulnerable. They may connect on the surface, smile politely, laugh, engage, but deep relationships feel threatening. And in moments of solitude, they may feel an ache, a longing for closeness, but the thought of emotional exposure brings anxiety. So they retreat into isolation, not because they don't want connection, but because they fear losing it once gained. In love, these individuals often sabotage connection without realizing it. They hesitate to say, "I miss you," fear confessing, "I need you," and substitute emotional honesty with silence or withdrawal. They assume their emotions will burden others. They may test loyalty quietly, pushing people away to see who returns. Yet every time someone leaves, as anyone eventually would when kept at emotional distance, their fear deepens. See, they tell themselves, no one stays. But the truth isn't that others refuse to stay. It's that they were never allowed in fully. The tragedy is that these individuals often have the deepest emotional capacity. They feel intensely, love sincerely, and care profoundly. But because their emotional world once felt like a battlefield, they now treat closeness as a risk instead of a gift. They want safety but also yearning, connection but also distance, love but also guardrails. They live in a tug-of-war between desire and fear. Healing this requires courage, not in removing the fear instantly, but in allowing small openings, a moment of honesty, a shared feeling, a quiet confession, a tiny step forward. Healing begins when they realize vulnerability is not a weakness. It is proof they are still capable of feeling, caring, and hoping. Slowly, as trust rebuilds, walls lower. Not all at once, but brick by brick. And in those moments of gentle opening, connection becomes possible again. Because despite their fears, the heart always remembers how to love. It just needs to learn that this time it is safe. When someone carries a broken sense of self, they often exist in a state of emotional numbness, an inner deadness that is mistaken by others as coldness, indifference, or lack of care. But numbness is rarely a natural emotional state. It is a defense mechanism built slowly, layer by layer, after pain has been felt too deeply and too often. When a person cannot escape emotional wounds, they eventually stop feeling altogether, not because they no longer care, but because caring became too heavy. Their mind decides that feeling is unsafe, so it anesthetizes the heart. And this numbness, while protecting them from hurt, also steals joy, excitement, and meaning. Life becomes functional rather than felt, survived rather than lived. People in this state often describe life as muted, like the world has lost color. They go through daily routines, accomplish tasks, interact normally, yet feel disconnected from themselves and others. It is not sadness. Sadness has depth, emotion, and movement. Numbness is stillness, like the soul is sleeping behind the eyes. They may crave feeling again, love, passion, happiness, but simultaneously fear those emotions because with feeling comes vulnerability, and with vulnerability comes potential pain. So they remain suspended in emotional limbo, present but absent, alive but not fully living. This emotional shutdown often develops after repeated invalidation. When someone's feelings have been ignored, mocked, or misunderstood for long enough, they learn to stop bringing emotions forward. When they were hurt and told to get over it, they learn to silence their pain. Over time, they adopt emotional invisibility as a coping strategy. If no one sees my emotions, no one can hurt them, but what protects them also isolates them. Emotional numbness is self-preservation at the cost of self-expression. And here lies a quiet truth. Numbness is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of suppressed emotion. Beneath the still surface exists a flood that was never allowed to move. Healing, therefore, does not come from forcing feeling to return instantly. It comes from creating safe spaces where emotion is allowed to breathe again. It starts when a person stops judging themselves for feeling nothing, and instead recognizes numbness as a wound, not a flaw. It deepens when they allow small emotional moments, listening to a song that stirs something, expressing a feeling even if it feels weak, crying even if they don't fully understand why. Sometimes numbness breaks not through sudden inspiration but through gentleness, patience, warmth, and acceptance. The heart does not wake up by force, it wakes up when it feels safe again, and the remarkable thing is this: numbness means the person once cared deeply. It means they once felt intensely enough to build a shield. Their emotional silence is not a sign of emptiness. It is proof of a heart that once beat loudly and will again, slowly, when pain no longer threatens to break it. Those who carry a broken sense of self often appear incredibly independent, but this independence is rarely born from confidence. It is built from necessity. When trust has been shattered, when help was unavailable, or when vulnerability once led to pain, a person learns to rely only on themselves. They convince themselves that depending on others is dangerous, that needing someone is weakness, and that leaning on others only invites disappointment. So they build emotional armor and take pride in solitude, not because they never wished for support, but because support never felt safe. Their independence becomes their identity, their shield, and their survival strategy. This hyper-independence is misunderstood. To the outside world, it looks strong, disciplined, self-sufficient. People admire them for never asking for help, for handling everything alone. But inside, the story is different. The self-reliance that others praise is often a response to abandonment, betrayal, or repeated emotional neglect. It is the child who learned that crying brings no comfort, the adolescent who discovered that opening up invites judgment, the adult who decided it is better to carry everything alone than risk falling apart in someone else's hands. Independence becomes not a choice, but the only safe option. Over time, this protective shield isolates them. They crave closeness but feel uneasy when someone tries to get emotionally near. They want connection, yet they push people away at the first sign of intimacy. They long for someone to understand them, but they don't trust that anyone ever truly will, and so they become a fortress, impenetrable from the outside, but lonely on the inside. What looks like strength is often hidden fear. The fear of being let down again, the fear of giving someone the power to hurt them, the fear of needing someone who may not stay. Deep down, they do not reject love. They fear its fragility. They do not avoid dependence because they dislike connection. They fear abandonment. They do not want to be alone. They simply refuse to be broken again. But healing requires a different kind of courage. Not the courage to stand alone, but the courage to let someone in. Healing begins the moment they allow themselves to believe that vulnerability is not weakness. that asking for support does not diminish strength, and that connection is not a threat, but a human necessity. Learning to trust again is not about erasing the past, but about slowly proving to the wounded parts of the self that not everyone will leave, not everyone will harm, and not every open door leads to pain. True strength is not refusing help, it is knowing when you don't have to carry the world alone. The heart that rebuilds trust after being shattered is stronger than the heart that never broke. And the day a broken self finally opens the door to connection, not out of fear, but out of courage, that is the day they begin to truly heal.